Welcome. Thank you for being here. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Emma Gibbon. I'm the Adult Services Librarian here at the library. I'm going to keep this really quick. I'm incredibly grateful to the Community Conversations team for putting all this together. The amount of effort and care that they've put into it has been just phenomenal. And so now I'm going to pass over to our moderator, Jo D Saffeir, the Deputy Commissioner, Maine Department of Agriculture, Conservation and Forestry.
Thank you so much. How is the volume? Oppressive or too much? Louder? Would be louder better? How's this? Better? Okay. All right, awesome. Thank you so much for coming. Good evening. I'm sure there are many other things that you could be doing tonight. But instead, you're here to talk about food and access to food and all of the economic conditions that are making it quite difficult for some people to have sufficient food, and challenges that farmers are experiencing producing food. And so we have a panel of incredible experts here to talk with you. We'll be asking them some questions, but true to the name of this group that's put together this first of, I believe, to be a series of conversations. This is called Community Conversations, so we want to make sure that you have an opportunity to weigh in as well and share your experience, whether you are a farmer or working in the emergency food system in some way, volunteering, or as an employee, whether you just love to eat. And so we just want to make sure that you have an opportunity to share your thoughts as well. So I was asked to be part of this by Jeff Fisher, who is part of the group that has been calling itself Community Conversations, and their purpose is to initiate community dialogues on important topics that will help inform people by getting input from experts and from other community members about how rapid changes in our government in particular are impacting individuals and communities, particularly in Mid-Coast Maine. So to start us off, I was hoping that you might be able to just self-identify so that we know who's in the room. Are there any farmers here tonight? Wonderful. What's your name?
Ben Watley Farm in Topsham.
Thanks for coming. We'll make sure we ask you things if you're willing to share. How about people working on food insecurity? Yeah, I'm so glad you're here. Did I see some hands as well? Okay, great. We'll make sure we'll ask you to weigh in and others as well, of course, but there'll be plenty of conversation about that, so we welcome your input. Any others involved in any other part of the food system, working at restaurants, teachers who are interacting with students who, wonderful, okay. Well, absolutely make sure that in between the conversations that we are having and remarks that we are hearing from the panel, we'll ask you to talk as well. Maybe a few of you could just volunteer, like what exactly brought you out here tonight? Like what do you most want to hear about? And we have a lineup of questions, but if we weave in your biggest concerns, we want to do that as well. Just a few thoughts that any of you have. Yeah.
How farmers are being affected by the current situation.
Okay, perfect. How farmers are being affected by current conditions. Other interests? Yeah.
How to best support small farmers in the Mid-Coast and get what they're producing on the tables of people in the local community.
Awesome. Okay, perfect. I won't repeat that. I think your voice carried, so I'm guessing that folks are, yeah.
As food prices rise, I'm really concerned about the vulnerable people in our community and how they're going to survive.
Great. Okay, perfect. Yeah, I think we'll be covering all of that, so that's wonderful. Oh, sorry. What did I miss? Somebody? Yeah. Okay.
I'm on food stamps, and I used to be a farmer in another state, a little tiny grade A goat dairy. So I've recently been volunteering at my local farmer's market to man the snack booth, they call it. And I'm just gonna mention it's in Bath, which the farmer's market is down by the river. We basically have one person on SNAP show up most of the time. And in the summer, it's a little bit better, but some of the impacts are, it's all uphill from the waterfront. A lot of people in Bath do not own a car. There's no bus service on the weekends, and the market is on a Saturday. When you do take the regular city bus, like to a regular grocery store, you're only allowed to have 2 bags. Well, me at 70 carrying 2 bags is a lot different size than some guy at BIW that's, 30 years old and muscular. So there's a lot of, that's primary access.
Sure. Yeah, and you're just described a whole host of barriers to accessing healthy food. So I appreciate that. Okay, I think we'll be covering that as well. And so, yeah, thank you so much for that. Well, so I'll describe the format that we're gonna plow through. We're gonna finish at 7:30 because that's the plan. It's open, the library is open until 8 o'clock, and you definitely welcome folks to stay on afterwards if you'd like to have conversations with one another. I can't speak for the speakers and what their plans are after 7:30, but maybe some of them will be able to stay a little bit longer as well. So we'll be focusing on 3 questions, and the first is really just starting out. Yes, question? No? Okay, sorry. The first is really trying to get a handle on the current conditions, whether they're economic conditions, challenges that farmers are experiencing, trends in food insecurity. So just sort of like what's going on now and what are the factors that are influencing what's going on now. That's sort of the nature of the first set of questions. We'll be asking for your input in between those remarks. After that, it's really what programs or activities are in place that are trying to address those challenges, get some input from each of them about that, and then finally we'll end with if you have needs yourself for greater support or you want to be involved in some way to support members of your community, what are some things that you could be doing? So that's kind of the flow, a little bit of doom and gloom at the beginning, then sort of, optimistic programs, and then like action. So we're going to start with Garrett Martin.
Doom and gloom.
Who is the president of the Maine Center for Economic Policy. And that organization is a nonpartisan research and policy organization based in Augusta and dedicated to improving the economic well-being of Mainers with low and moderate income. For over 30 years, that organization has supported working families by advocating for fairer tax policies, for access to education, healthcare, and livable wage jobs, and for investment in government programs and services that Mainers rely on. So the question for you, Garrett, is can you start us off by providing an overview of the current economic well-being of people living in Maine, particularly low to moderate income Mainers, and what key economic factors are trickling down to ultimately impact food affordability in Maine?
Sure. First of all, thank you for the invitation to be here tonight, and it's amazing to have such a room full of robust people. So I'm looking forward to sharing doom and gloom with you.
I shouldn't have said that.
So, let's just hop in because the time is fleeting and we don't have time to waste on this stuff. We're on a 50-year trajectory of widening inequality in this country. And that trajectory means that people who are with low or moderate incomes are actually falling further behind those who do not. So we have this very interesting dynamic unfolding in our economy today. You'll hear people talk about the K-shaped recovery and those kinds of things, where we are actually seeing more people attain more wealth. So more people are actually moving out of the middle class into the upper middle and upper class. But similarly, those at the bottom are actually losing ground relative to where those people are. And what happens is that dispersion occurs. It means that the economic realities are increasingly that services catering to the upper income folks are where the market is going. So when you think about housing, for instance, right? housing is being constructed to cater to people who have the resources to buy bigger homes with more amenities. They're not being constructed to address the needs of people on the lower end of the ladder, right? So that's one thing we just have to acknowledge and come to terms with. We are on a 50-year trajectory of this pattern occurring, where lower income households have fewer and fewer ability to adapt and to adjust to maintain their tenuous grip on what traditionally has been sort of a middle class lifestyle, right? So if you go back to the 70s, when wage growth sort of paralleled gains in economic growth, that relationship has been broken. And so working families, in order to maintain their grip, have adapted over a period of time. So the first adaptation was more women entered the workforce in two-parent households, right? Then families increased their combined work effort, right? So there's a period of time in Maine where married couples increase their combined work effort by about 400 hours a year. That's how you maintain it. Well, then what happens? Well, okay, so now wages still aren't keeping pace, and so families start to do things like forego investing in the future, so saving for education, saving for retirement, those kinds of things, right? We saw that pattern occur. Well, then what happens? Oh, crikey, now we're really behind the curve, so now we've got to dip into our wealth, if we have any, borrowing against our homes in order to maintain current consumption. And so the 2008 recession just sort of blew that whole thing up, right? So that's the biggest bloom part. So what does that mean for where we are now? Well, in terms of Maine, and quite frankly the rest of the nation, we see a surprising number of households who have very little assets, limited wealth, right? They are working, but they're not earning enough to actually get ahead. And so what that means is, in this country today, you see somewhere between 45–50% of households who could not afford an unexpected $400 expense without going into debt or foregoing a significant item that they need, like medicines or food, right? So think about that. You're driving down the road and you pay what we affectionately call the Maine front-end tax. You hit a big pothole and it causes you to have to replace a tire because it popped. Well, if you're one of those lucky few who can go to the VIP auto or wherever your place of choice is and plunk down $350 for a new tire, congratulations. But for a lot of people, that puts them in a very precarious spot. So the United Way puts out a measure called ALICE, and what that stands for is Asset Limited, Income Constrained, and Employed. So these are people who are employed. And what they see for the state of Maine as a whole is that roughly 40% of the population is in this space where they are below the threshold that would be required to be able to basically have economic stability and security in their lives. 40%. So in Maine today, we have roughly more than 1 out of 10 households are living in poverty. And the poverty level in this state for an individual is about $15,000 a year. For a two-parent household, it's around $30,000 a year. Imagine trying to navigate Maine on $30,000 a year with 2 kids. So the poverty measure we can just ignore because it's no longer relevant. But the ALICE standard is higher, but again, it reflects this dynamic that families are facing hardship. Now, the most tenuous families are single mother households with children. Those households are facing economic insecurity at levels around 55–60%. So 6 out of 10 single parent households, female-led households, are facing that sort of barely being able to keep sort of the wheels on, if you will. We see obviously other groups of people face those similar things. So let's talk about, so we've talked a little bit about this metric of economic security, the ALICE measure, and if you're interested in that, I would suggest you look it up online. There is the ALICE report for Maine, United Way of Maine puts it out, and it's really useful data, useful information. And just incidentally, we at the Maine Center for Economic Policy also produce legislative district fact sheets with sort of information on legislative districts. I've put some back there for folks who want a little more wonky data stuff. But the other piece to the puzzle here that is all the rage right now is affordability, right? Anybody in this room sort of thought about rising costs in their lives lately? Maybe, anyone? You? Okay, so what we know is that the biggest ticket item that most families incur is their shelter, their housing costs, right? And we have gone through a phenomenal period of price increases in the housing market in the state, such that fewer than 35% of households can actually afford to buy a house at median home cost currently in the state. That is huge. So not only are costs going up in housing, we know the costs have gone up in childcare, we know that costs have gone up in healthcare, right? So all those things are happening. But the other part of this puzzle, and I will bring us to the present, and then I will turn it over to people who are going to give you less gloom and doom.
I don't know.
Going back to that whole story about we're on the 50-year trajectory of widening inequality, we make policy choices that make that worse or make it better. And the policy choices in effect right now are making that worse for a lot of households. So when you look at the economic policies currently coming out of Washington, Maine families are getting hammered, and they're getting hammered in a couple different ways. So the tariff regime of the Trump administration is increasing costs to the tune of about $1,600 a year for the average Maine household. That $1,600 far outstrips any benefit that Mainers are getting from the tax cuts that were passed last year. Okay, so that's point one. The other piece of the puzzle, though, is those tax cuts disproportionately benefited billionaires and large corporations. Incidentally, anybody want to guess how much Tesla paid in corporate taxes last year? Zero. You're in more audience. Yeah, so Tesla paid zero. So they are further exacerbating the inequality that I talked about that is also therefore making it harder for people on the bottom. But at the same time, in order to partially pay for those cuts, what did they do? They cut health care and they cut food assistance. So 65,000 households in the state of Maine are going to lose their Medicaid because of the big beautiful bill that passed last year. 117,000 households are going to lose either their nutrition assistance or see the value of that assistance go down as a consequence of that. So that's what's in that package. And then you look at the failure to extend the premium tax credits. I have friends who both work, a couple, 55, and they're without health insurance for the first time in their lives. And when you talk about small farmers, this is a place in which small farmers in particular are getting hit really hard. Entrepreneurs, small business owners, farmers are getting really nailed by the failure to expand the premium tax credits. And then the last thing, and I will stop, is this war. So you cannot look at what's currently happening in Iran and not frame it from an economic perspective for what it means for affordability. Just go fill up your tank. And transportation costs is the second largest piece of people's economic pie. So if we're basically asking people to pay $25, $30, $40 more per tank of gas, and that persists, that means people are going to be paying somewhere between $1,000 and $2,000 more a year in order to have gas in their tank so that they can get to work, right? The other thing that's happening, this relates to farmers, is fuel costs and fertilizer costs are going to go through the roof. And while we're not seeing increasing in grocery prices presently, we will see those increases in a couple months as that starts to work its way through the system. And then the last place has to do with mortgage rates. Because of inflation concerns, what's happening is mortgage rates, they were below 6% a couple weeks ago, but they're now going up. So what that means is if you buy a home today versus if you bought it 2 weeks ago and gotten a mortgage, you're going to pay somewhere between $1,200 and $2,000 more just on account of that.
I'm gonna cut you off.
So there we go.
Hate to do that.
No.
You're on a roll and we don't wanna know all of it, but thank you so much.
Yep.
All right, I'm gonna move on to another speaker and then after that speaker, ask for your input as well. Next up is Hannah Chalbash, and she is the Executive Director of Mid-Coast Hunger Prevention Program, which is an organization based in Brunswick, and its mission is to offer dignity and empowerment by providing all members of our community with access to healthy food. So the question for you, Hannah, is what is the current state of food insecurity in Maine? Building off of what Garrett just described for us, what challenges have you witnessed over the past 5 years that community members have been facing going back perhaps to COVID and continuing on through the change in administration.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. There's so many MCHPP friendly faces in the room, so it's lovely to see you all and to be able to come out and speak to you tonight. Everything that Garrett just shared resonates so strongly. I mean, these are the people that we are seeing day in and day out at MCHPP. For those of you who don't know us, we run a large food pantry right across the bridge in downtown Brunswick. We also have numerous satellite pantry sites throughout the area, including down the street at Moderator Middle School. And I think sometimes people have a misjudged idea of what it looks like to be food insecure, because in different places around the world, we think food insecurity more as a famine. It's a supply and demand problem, right? There's simply not enough product to feed the population of people. That's not our problem here in the United States. We have ample food. Our grocery stores are full. The problem is access, and that lack of access typically comes down to economics, that families can't afford to go in and buy the product that should be readily available to them. And those families are Alice. They are that asset limited income constrained employed family. They're also unhoused individuals who might be underemployed, seniors on a fixed budget, a very diverse crew of folks who range across the spectrum in our community. And when their household budget is strained, they turn to their local food pantry. It is often one of the only places you can go to try to access a resource for free. And if you have a good food pantry available to you, that's a really beautiful resource to be able to get to. We have seen really significant growth in the rates of food insecurity over recent years, unfortunately. Currently, 1 in 8 adults in Maine is food insecure. That rate is much higher in children. 1 in 5 kids experiences food insecurity, and 1 in 6 seniors. In 2020, our primary pantry site was seeing about 8,000 visits a year. To set a little bit of context. I want you to imagine that from 2020 to today, that line graph looks a little bit like a check mark. So, actually in 2021, we saw food insecurity rates in our community drop. It was a really extraordinary moment in time where the federal government decided that, oh wait, there's a lot of food insecurity, a lot of economic instability, and the cause is something that is not people's fault necessarily. It's this external cause, and maybe we could do something about it. They provided all sorts of resources for families and really bolstered that social safety net at that time. So that's when we saw the stimulus payments, we saw SNAP benefits get expanded, we saw the child tax credit get expanded, really increased the amount of money being made available to families. Within that 1 year time frame, from 2020 to 2021, we cut child poverty in half in this country to its lowest rate ever in the history of the country, 5.2%. By the end of 2023, we had more than doubled that rate, and today we're at a 16% child poverty rate. Like Garrett said, those are policy choices. We made choices to lower those rates, and we also made choices to raise them again. And the fact that there isn't a ton of outrage about that makes me a little crazy. We could talk about that later. It's not the point of my part of this presentation. Feels like it didn't even make the news, but that's an extraordinary thing for us to consider. We made so much progress. Unfortunately, we walked it all back. So like I said, back in 2020, we were doing about 8,000 visits a year to our primary pantry site. We are now doing about 22,000 visits a year to our primary pantry site, and we have added a significant number of secondary sites along the way. So we're just seeing really extreme growth and a significant increase in demand. At the same time, the charitable food network is being attacked on the back end. So we're also seeing our food supply and our financial resources be rolled back by the federal government. So there's numerous programs where historically the federal government has subsidized either free produce, free dry goods, free food from the agricultural sector to be distributed through the charitable food network. And a lot of those programs have been defunded either entirely or significantly. So this time last year, we were getting about 12,000 pounds a month of free food from the federal government. We are now getting 4,000 pounds a month of free food from the federal government. So we're trying to do more with less. For a pantry like ours that's fairly unique and has resources and infrastructure, we are spending a lot more money on food. That's what we are doing to continue to meet the need to the standard at which we expect to meet it and hope to meet it, to honor the dignity of the people in our community. A lot of pantries just are not in a place to be able to do that. So that means that ultimately the people that are paying the price are the end consumer at the food pantry. They're the guests who's showing up and seeing that the shelves just have less food available. And that is such a shame in a country that can afford to do so much better. So I'm gonna just continue on the doom and gloom train. I don't have much really positive to say, but that's the state of where things are today. Unfortunately, we don't see this trajectory really changing in the coming months, not in a positive way.
Thank you so much. I think I recall some folks saying that they either worked in this space, volunteered in this space. Anything that you want to add to what you've heard Hannah just described from your own experience? Just raise a hand if you do. Yes?
I volunteer at the pantry, and I do intake. And I've seen over the years that the distance that people come from has really increased. So we get, at least on the day that I'm there, as far as Biddeford, inland to, I don't know inland really well, but Sanford and those areas come into Brunswick, Augusta, east of Booth Bay, I can't remember the names, but they're coming from all over because it's a fabulous pantry. It really is. So that, I think, is another change over the years.
Sure.
Thank you for your volunteer service. And one thing that is unique about NCHP is we are open on Saturdays. We're the only, I haven't found another one yet. I think we're the only pantry in the state that is open on Saturdays. So for that, those employee families, if your local pantry is open on Thursdays from 12 to 2, that might be a wonderful resource for some folks. It may not work for you. So they do tend to now travel fairly far.
Other reactions, experiences? Yes.
I just want to say that you are the opposite of doom and gloom because you are doing the good work. So thank you.
Thank you. It is a beautiful place to be.
And you are too, Garrett, but you know, she doesn't.
My mother still loves me. I think.
All right, then we'll move on and we'll be able to come back to this conversation, obviously. Stacy Brenner is next up, and Stacy is a woman who I'm not sure you sleep. I don't know how to get what you get done. She is a state senator, she is a farmer, and she is president and CEO of Maine Farmland Trust, which is based in Belfast and Portland, and whose mission is to grow a robust future for farming in Maine by protecting our finite farmland, supporting farmers to keep land in production, and advocating for the conditions that farms and farmers need to thrive. So the question for you is, what challenges are you seeing that Maine farmers are facing today that are different or greater than those that they experienced 1 to 5 years ago, whether they're economic, federal policy related, environmental, or other factors?
Thank you for the question. Can you guys hear me okay? Not on. How do we turn it on? Switch microphones. All right. How about that? Is that better?
Okay. Closer. And I can give you mine if necessary.
Okay.
How about that?
Perfect. All right. And do you all know Jo D? Do you know what she does? Did we introduce you? Because you're pretty magnificent yourself. We've intertwined over the years, but Jo D works as the bureau director. Deputy Commissioner, thank you. I knew there was a change in title. Deputy Commissioner at the Department of Agriculture, and is just an incredible powerhouse. And as we talk about policy solutions, it's really important to have aligned folks within the department that are going to implement policies in ways that work and are effective and can translate into rules that are applicable to farmers in ways that make the work happen. So thank you for your service. And I also want to say, Garrett, you basically outlined what is the reality economically for a farm a farmer in the state of Maine or a farm worker. They live pretty close to the bone. And so everything you outlined from the housing situation to the healthcare situation to the loss of to the expanded subsidy on the ACA, on the Affordable Care Act marketplace health insurance program, those all impact farmers greatly. But the work at Maine Farmland Trust, what we find when we're reaching out and speaking with the farmers within our network that they're struggling with the most are the basics that they've always struggled with, but in greater ways that include the weather challenges, the realities of affordability for things like fuel and fertilizer, like you mentioned. When we see farmers that are coming into the field for the first time and they're looking for land access challenges present incredible hurdles for new farmers coming in. We have lost over the years from 2012 to 2022, 220,000 acres of agricultural land out of production in the state of Maine, which is the size of Saginaw County. So that is related to either business viability that didn't work out for a specific business, loss to solar, or loss to other kinds of development. But that amount of loss of what we deem as an essential piece of infrastructure for the food system is the land. You get farmland once. Once you lose it, you can't get it back. So you do have innovative opportunities, things like the vertical harvest in Westbrook, which is a hydroponic farm, but once you lose agricultural soils, they're gone forever. So you don't get them back. So we work hard to think about how that asset is important to our food system. The other issue to highlight would be in the federal cuts that have happened since the big, beautiful bill, I guess is what some people like to call it. Since that program went into place, we've seen a major cut in the USDA programming around the NRCS, which is an acronym that stands for Natural Resource Conservation Service. So in the state of Maine, they've cut 36% of the employees within that program. And so on the ground, what that looks like for farmers is a really limited amount of technical assistance to support them in program development. If a farmer is looking to implement a practice, they received a cost share from the USDA through the NRCS program, and they need an engineer to come and provide some sort of feedback and sign off on a report in order for that project to be completed. The number of people available in each county to provide that service is 36% less than it used to be. So that's really hard and difficult for farmers to then be able to access any kind of program that is available, because the actual bodies in the office to get the work done just don't exist anymore in the same way that they used to. They were already short-staffed like leading up to this, but now they're gutted, basically. In addition, when farmers go into the business of farming because they want to feed people. They want to feed into the food security system. They want to feed people with means and people without means. They're in it for the service of food. So there had been a program called the Local Food Purchasing Assistance Program that was cut by that's $1.3 million worth of food that was moving from Maine farms into the food security system and into local schools. Those were contracts that farmers had anticipated having, they planned for, in some cases they've already started planting, growing these products for these contracts. A farmer loves a contract, much like a CSA, Community Supporting Agriculture, that's a contract. So a farmer knows, I'm going to put this amount of effort in, I'm going to produce this amount of crop, and I've sold it. So when you can pre-sell something, that's the ideal relationship for a farmer, because the marketing of a product is actually what is the most challenging. Production provides challenges, but finding markets and getting your product out the door is really the larger challenge. So having those contracts and that were designed to provide food into into the food security system, those made people feel good about the work they were doing, in addition to also providing them monetary support. Gosh, I could just keep going.
One last thought?
Yeah.
that you want to provide, before I pivot to ask for?
Well, no, let's open it up to questions, because you don't just want to hear me keep talking. And then, I mean, obviously, there's policy solutions on both the state and federal level, and I'm always thinking about what bill we should be putting in. So, yeah.
Great, awesome. Ben, can I click on you and ask if you want to add anything in particular to what Stacy's comments were?
Oh, sure. Yeah, so NRCS 10 or 15 years ago, right, they were like knocking on our door, hey, let's do this stuff all the time, right? And we've really seen that go to, like, now I don't even really know who to talk to. I think I do, maybe, but they're so gutted, like you said. But those were these are the kind of investments that, like, if you see a farm that has a gravel road, maybe instead of just deep ruts get into a field, that might be because NRCS came knocking and said, hey, we could help improve this for you, right? Like, they help with capital investments that protect natural resources. So yeah, honestly, right now, like, we're not really thinking about NRCS projects as much. Like, yeah, if we think we could pull one off, that'd be great, but we're looking more at, like, state of Maine, Department of Agriculture, Conservation and Forestry, and feel like that's a more reliable partner at the time, so. Yeah.
Thank you, yeah. Were there any farmers here? Yeah, go ahead. Or do you got a related question?
I'm not a farmer.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
But I have a question. A few years ago, we were getting reports that more land was moving into agricultural production in Maine, and the average age of farmers was among the youngest in the country because of that whole phenomenon of young people moving in to take over farming. Where are we with that whole set of trends?
I would say that we are not in a place where we're having more land move into agriculture. We're losing more land out of agriculture, so we're going in the opposite direction. With regard to the age of farmers, it still hovers around 58, and we really struggle to figure out how to provide the support system and services for transition and succession for farmers. So that remains a challenge, and MFT is committed to engaging with families in that space where they're in that vulnerable space. It's incredibly challenging. It's about a 10-year process to think about what succession and transition looks like for a farm family. Ideally, you're trying to, in many cases, there's a in-family transition opportunity. In a lot of cases, there's not. And so we like to envision ways where we can match new farmers who don't have a generational capacity for an inherited piece of farmland at their fingertips, to be able to match them with a succession and transition plan with a family who's moving out of agriculture that doesn't have family that's interested. It's not always possible. It's a little kismet when it does happen, and when it does happen, we're thrilled. But we need to have strategies that are clever, creative, to be able to pull land that's incredibly valuable agriculturally off the market and wait and allow that kismet to happen, because we don't want to lose it in that transition and succession period. But agricultural land has increased 44% in value over the last decade. That's a big price jump. And so we're competing, and I want to state clearly that I totally agree that there's a housing crisis, but yes, and there's a housing crisis and there's an agricultural land loss crisis happening at the same time. And we can have both if we're smart and clever and creative about the way we use land.
Thank you. Okay, go ahead, and then I'm going to switch over to.
So, John, to your question, there is an area of optimism in this regard, which is in aquaculture. which is an industry sector in which you're actually seeing younger entrants. The initial upfront capital outlay is less, and I mean, I can say this, my daughter actually has worked in that industry, and her perspective on it is, it's also interesting in that there are disproportionate number of women in that industry as compared to some of the traditional fisheries. So I think that is an area where there's potential growth and where we're seeing opportunities spring up for younger entrants. But I know it's a both and it's an all things need to come together. So.
Awesome, thank you. Well, let's bring Dustin Strasburger into the conversation. He is the Executive Director of Full Place, Full Potential, which is an organization based in Portland and whose mission is to strengthen child nutrition programs as critical tools for ending childhood food insecurity in Maine. So for you, Justin, can you share what the current state of childhood food insecurity is in Maine, how it's trending, and we did hear about some of that from Hannah, and how it compares to the rest of the country, and what the primary variables are that are impacting this?
Sure. Can folks hear me? Awesome. We're actually headquartered in Brunswick, right across the river. No, it's no worries. Just hometown crowd, so I want to get the hometown benefit there. I have a bit of food going last year, which means that everyone here already said all the things I was going to say, but it's actually good news because I get to not just be doom and gloom. But I will start with some doom and gloom. Maine does and has consistently had the highest rates of childhood food insecurity in New England. Right now it's about 20%, and I would say at least 20%. One of the reasons I say at least is we really don't know for sure. The best data we have on this comes from a national food insecurity survey that the Trump administration just did away with pretty recently. So, even then, it was always a lagging indicator based off of surveying and extrapolating data from there. Garrett spoke about the ALICE data. I like talking about things in those terms because I think it gives a much better perspective of poverty rates, which is really, to answer your second question there, the real driver of childhood food insecurity, as it is for food insecurity across the board. But we do know that in this state and across the country, households with children in them, so yes, families, experience food insecurity at much higher rates than those without children. Hannah mentioned the child tax credit, and I want to talk about this a little bit. We are, amongst other things, an advocacy-based organization, and I think it's important. You may have heard the talking point that Hannah mentioned before around we expanded the child tax credit and a number of other things, and cut childhood poverty rates in half in a year, and then they bounced right back. But I want to drill down on what was in that expanded child tax credit, because it's so common sense. It was, yes, an increase in the actual amount, which had not increased in meaningful ways for years and years while inflation had gone up. But more importantly, it was how it was delivered. And there were two key things that went into that I think really made a difference. One, half of the refund was given out in monthly prepayments to families. And if you think about families that are, like Garrett mentioned, that cannot afford an unplanned expense, I don't need those funds after I file my taxes and get a refund. I can't afford to wait on that. I need this on an ongoing monthly basis to supplement my income. That's when I need to help affording my family, being able to pay for the expenses of having children. The other thing it did was it made that fully refundable, which meant that the most impoverished families in our country generally earned so low that they paid no federal income taxes. And the way the tax credit had been set up was that if you paid no federal income taxes, you didn't get that then refunded on top of that. This change made that different, made it fully refundable. So those two things, among many other policy shifts and things like that, again, in a year, created the lowest rates of childhood poverty we have had, I believe, on record. it is as close as you will ever come in this kind of systems change kind of world to seeing true causation. And yet I am as infuriated as Hannah that that data was not enough for Congress to maintain that. But I wanted to really drill down on that because I think it's important to really talk about how doable this is if we have the will. This did not cost a tremendous amount of money in the scheme of things. And there's, Garrett could probably quote many better statistics than I could about the economic impact, positive economic impact you have when you make these kind of investments in families to make sure that they have the resources they need to cover the bare minimum and what they're then able to do and how the positive impact that has on the economy. So I want to drill down on that. But I want to talk a little bit about some positive, and positive is relative in this day and age, I recognize that. For the decade preceding the pandemic in this country, we had seen food insecurity rates slowly tick down a little bit. And then as Hannah shared, they dropped quite precipitously during the pandemic. Since the pandemic, they have shot back up to rates that are now higher than they were a decade before the pandemic, so that it has been like this. Here in Maine, they have not risen quite as steep. It's still a crisis. It is still worse than it was before the pandemic, but compared to the rest of the country, where looking at this, and they look at this again in sort of 3-year rolling averages, because again, you're talking about surveying. I'm not an economist, so I'm not a data scientist, but between 2015 and 2017, in that sort of 3-year time frame, Maine had the 9th highest rate of food insecurity in the country. In the 2021 to 2023 time frame, we were 29th. That's still way too many people going hungry. I want to be quite clear about that. But it shows that we are trying to take this issue seriously in the state in a way that others are not. And so I want to unpack that a little bit because this is relevant to the work that we've done at Full Place, Full Potential. One of the things we're proudest of is our work to lead the passage of school meals for all in the state. We made school meals free for all students. And that happened during the pandemic. And it happened thanks to Senator Brenner and many other folks up in the State House who saw that, hey, this is one of the many policies the federal government rolled out in response to the pandemic and said, hey, this is something we can do to make this easier. And Maine said, we're not going to go back. It makes too much sense. And it doesn't just make sense from a food security perspective. It absolutely does. But let me tell you a little bit about what this has done for the state. So since we have passed that bill, we have seen skyrocketing participation in school meals. We've seen about a 34% increase in school breakfast served, a 21% in school lunch served. But what that has brought with it is every single meal that's served brings with it additional federal dollars. So we're now seeing, compared to 2019, about 4 million additional federal dollars coming into the state just to pay for this. And we know that one of the things that was so important to us in passing this is we knew that the metric for school meals around who has to pay for it, who doesn't, was not in line with the economic reality of families. In fact, we knew that there were about 40% of families facing food insecurity who were above that federal poverty line, meaning they were not eligible for free or reduced meals. And when you include those folks in there, and think about the cost savings for those families when their children are able to go to school and access meals there, and the families are not having to put money towards that, and able to put that money towards heating assistance or their own meals, that is now saving families $25 million a year annually. And yes, this is coming out of tax dollars and things like that, but I want to reiterate, Maine is a taker on the federal stage. Every dollar that we pay in federal taxes, we get back about $1.78 in economic benefit here. And the last piece I want to talk about, that's again a little bit of bad news, but there's an opportunity here, is SNAP. Because we haven't talked a lot about that today. For every meal that food pantries provide, that Hannah and the wonderful team there provides, SNAP provides 9. SNAP is by far the largest anti-hunger program we have in this country, and it is not in any way something that can be replicated or solved through philanthropy or through the charitable food system. And it is significantly under attack. In that big, whatever you want to call it, bill, there were a number of very harmful changes to SNAP that were rolled out. Included among them were increased work requirements. The reality is the vast majority of folks who are on SNAP do work. The ones that do not are often disabled and not able to work. But the increase in work requirements is adding additional administrative burdens, adding complication into the system. And they paired it with pulling back the amount of federal resources going into states to support administration of SNAP, meaning that that you have less resources to try to process more applications and more data. And for the first time ever, expecting states to cover a portion of the SNAP benefits themselves, and they're basing that off of states' error rate. The error rate is the amount, the percentage of benefits that are misallocated. That could be an underpayment, that could be an overpayment. What we know from lots of studies is the vast majority, this is not fraud. What this is administrative errors. There's an example for, of a woman who was asked to report her income, and she reported her net income instead of her gross income. This was an honest mistake, but that is an error.
Let's bring in, I hate cutting people off, but I know that there were some people who raised their hand about either being teachers, educators. I don't know if anybody works in childcare, but I'm just wondering if there are other perspectives of what you're seeing in your work that relates to childhood food insecurity, just to make sure we get your thoughts in the mix as well. Anybody?
I'll chime in.
Okay.
You and Mike?
My name is Shelley Hooper. I'm a selectman for the town of Birmingham, but I also work in public schooling here in Topsham. And I, first of all, as somebody that was born in Maine, have to say if you can't hear me, hi. I don't know if I need to repeat anything I just said. Good, I have a pretty loud voice, so I'm told, working in a school. I have noticed, first of all, with the lunch program and breakfast program, which the state of Maine has, something we should really take pride in. I love that it's also introduced students to farm food, local food. I have seen kids that normally might not try something that's like a fruit or a vegetable, that through various reasons weren't raised with them very much, try new things. I think that our farmers here in Maine are at the root of that, and I think that the meals programs that we have, so that it's not like you have to sign up for your reduced lunch to access that food. I think that's critical. Many people that need these supports and services don't necessarily want to single themselves out in any way. And it allows for dignity, it allows for children to not have this impact of hunger. I firsthand see parents who will forego what they need for their children, and this helps make it possible for them to meet other needs. They're not spending money on food to feed their kids in school. They're able to send them with better coats and better shoes, things like that. It's at that level where we're seeing an uptick in need, and at that level of local takes a village. Farmers are at the heart of that, so thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Was there another hand that raised that I thought I saw in peripheral vision? No. Okay. All right. Thank you. All right, so we're going to pivot, get a little bit more hopeful here. There are a lot of incredible programs and efforts underway throughout the state that are being done by your organizations and also just by many, many other organizations. So I just want to ask each of you if you might be able to highlight a few programs or efforts underway that you're most excited by, that inspires you to address some of the challenges that you described. So maybe instead of going through the same order, why don't I go with you, Hannah? Is that okay?
Sure.
Great.
Sure. So I'll highlight two things for you. The first is that in this environment in which the only thing that we can assume is that we have no idea what's going to happen tomorrow, the critical piece for us is the ability to be nimble, to be innovative, to be flexible. So that showed up within the past couple of months during the ice crisis in the state of Maine, all of a sudden we had significant swaths of our population who were no longer comfortable going out to access groceries, whether that was at the grocery store or at the food pantry. And the community responded in an incredible fashion, as we've come to expect of this part of the world. But we overnight had to figure out really quickly how to communicate with those folks, how to connect with them, how to get them groceries in a way that was safe and comfortable for them. And we were able to pull off an additional 230 home deliveries in the span of a couple of weeks to keep people safe and fed and cared for in this moment with the help of a lot of amazing volunteers. It's an example of the kind of work that is necessary right now, this ability to pivot and do something new and different right away. The other thing that I'll highlight quickly, because it's just a little bit of it's a pivot, a little bit different part of the work that we do that is not about direct service all the time. So we run a shared use processing kitchen. So we work in partnership with the Maine Food Council and a number of local farms and a number of small food businesses to run what we call the community kitchen. So it is, it's got 3 different parts to it. It's a processing space, so we use it to process surplus produce that the food bank receives. If you've ever been in a food bank, you know sometimes when it rains zucchini, it pours. So we just can't hand it out raw all the time. There's just too much. But we can process it and put it in the freezer and then incorporate it into soup kitchen meals or vacuum seal it into frozen packs for families in the wintertime to make fresh Maine produce available year-round in different formats. We also offer the kitchen for rent on a sliding scale for small food businesses that are trying to get off the ground. So it reduces that entry-level barrier of the affordability of creating your own kitchen. It's incredibly expensive. We also can help with the licensing, the certification, and we work with a small business consultant to help these businesses really learn about how to get their brand designed, how to find a market, how to build their product and get it out to the public. And the third and final piece of this is bringing in farms and co-packing for them. So helping them create value-added products that they can then bring to market year-round. I know we worked with Ben on that in the past, maybe some high-end pepper, is that right, Ben?
Yeah.
Yeah, so dehydrating some of the Watley Farms' beautiful hot peppers and grinding them up into a cayenne pepper so that they can still have their beautiful fresh product and add something new to their offerings to kind of diversify what they have to share with the public. So these are just really exciting ways that MCTP, as yes, a direct service provider on the ground, can also work to help build up the viability of our food system as a whole. Because in reality, in a situation where we have food insecurity, it's because the system itself is broken. And in order for it to work for the people who are the most vulnerable, we really have to look at all parts of this. We have to look at our farms, we have to look at our small businesses, our families, we provide direct service, and we also build up the local food economy in Maine. So, we need to take all of those pieces into account. And so I just wanted to share about that program, which is something that you might be less aware of, that we do behind the scenes.
Thank you so much. Very inspiring. I'm going to go to you, Justin.
Great, yeah, I'll pick up from there because I think one of the things that is really exciting and gives me a lot of hope in this state is the way in which our food insecurity system and our broader food system have really come together to be focused on how interrelated they are. One of the things we saw after we were one of the first states to pass stimulus for all, we saw a number of other states pass a version of that kind of legislation. And it has unfortunately been undone in a lot of those other states for a variety of reasons, including the way they had to fund it and other sorts of things. It is, we never want to take it for granted here, but it is incredibly strong here. And one of the reasons that it is so strong is that we have moved the focus away from paying for the meals, and it is now focused on what is possible with these meals. You spoke about the local foods, and that is now what we're talking about when you're not worried about whether or not kids can afford meals, and when you're pouring more dollars into school food systems, when you're not tying up school nutrition staff with chasing down school meal debt or chasing down parents' reforms, that frees them up to focus on what is going on the plate. And we have a tremendous opportunity here. We do not have big ag in this state. We have wonderful, wonderful small ag in this state, and small family farmers and fishermen. We produce so much here, and the vast majority of it leaves this state. There's such an opportunity here, and we're seeing it pay off. We've been able to pass wonderful policies at the state to expand our local purchasing incentive program for schools called the Local Foods Fund. That has seen tremendous growth over the years. Our organization, Full Plates, a couple years ago was able to secure a big federal grant from USDA to bring $10 million into the state. The vast majority of that's sub-granted out to some projects that are trying to better connect local economies to local schools and really strengthen that local food system. And all of those dollars are staying in the state. And it is so exciting to see kids. I got to be at my kids' elementary school across the river in Brunswick last year, watching them taste test fish tots. The Maine Coast Fisheries Association had developed through this USDA grant that we had. The closest thing to a preservative in these things was lemon juice. You could pronounce every single ingredient. My kids, I asked them when I said, I'm going to be in your cafeteria today, you going to try the fish? No, I don't eat fish. They liked them so much, my eldest was begging me to bring home leftovers. And not only did they like them, but they liked learning about where it's coming from. They loved the idea that this is something that came from their neighbors. And so as we are still, I believe, the oldest state in the country, if we want to have a future, we need to be investing in our families. We need to be investing in the future of our economy. And this is the way to do that, in this kind of shared ecosystem like this. The other initiative that I wanted to flag, that's sort of the positive-ish piece on the SNAP front, is while the dollars are going away, there are federal dollars available to states to support outreach for SNAP. And forever, this state has left dollars on the table, essentially. In large part because they did not have a willing partner outside of the state government to support this work. And about a year ago, a little over that, Full Plates saw this and said, hey, we want to do something about that, and we got the first contract ever with the state for this. And one government year after that, we've been able to recruit additional folks onto that contract, and where we were at one point, I think, getting something like $30,000 to $40,000 in federal funding towards SNAP outreach. This year, we're bringing $700,000 in federal funding for SNAP outreach. And that is dollars going to folks like Hannah and her team, who have forever already been doing SNAP outreach, to be clear. But it's actually giving them resources to do it. And we've been able to do this in a coordinated way, so we're able to get resources translated in a dozen different languages, but not every organization has to do that, right? So we're working in a really efficient way across all these different lines of industry, because we recognize that when SNAP is strong, those dollars flow into farmers markets, they flow into farmers' pockets, right? When food insecurity rate is low, it means everybody is able to afford our local economies in different ways, right? It's what's good for the whole system is what's good for our neighbors. And that's what gives me hope in a state like Maine, that I think is a little harder in some other states. So it's not easy, and there's a lot of hardship still, but I think we have a chance to do something a little different.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Stacey.
So I want to first point out a couple folks that are in the audience that for Maine Farmland Trust have been incredible partners. One is Sarah Alexander. Do you want to raise your hand, Sarah? She's a Topsham resident, so it's her hometown. Sarah's the executive director of MOFGA, Maine Organic Farmers and Gardeners Association, which is an incredible partner for Maine Farmland Trust. And so collaborating with both MOFGA and also Cooperative Extension. And Jason Lilly is here as well. And Jason has been a great friend of our farm for technical assistance, but also for putting together educational events and just providing community support around soil health and production and maple syrup, which is one of Jason's favorite products, mine too. So collaborators and partners in the community are one of the things that make the work more, when we work together, we are far more powerful than when we work in isolation. And Maine Farmland Trust prides itself on building trust within the farm community by listening to the voice of farmers. So we build our policy platform based on what farmers are telling us they need. And so that looks like, right now, working with both of those two folks that I mentioned in the audience on an agricultural bond, an infrastructure bond, to try to help support the economic viability of farm businesses by giving them just a little bit of a lift for efficiencies, drought relief, the kinds of things they need to get their businesses a little bit further along to be competitive. We have what in Maine, I'm gonna go doomsday again, but we play this race to the bottom game in Maine around price for agricultural products because we're always competing on the national and global market. And we're never going to be competitive because our cost of production is always going to be higher in the state based on energy and labor. And so making sure that we have the ability to give lifts to farmers around business supports so that they can have what they need to be efficient and effective in the marketplace. So the policy platform feels like a really strong place for MFT on the state level. In addition to state policy, MFT is really focused on municipal policy because we see a lot of capacity to affect the way land use happens and the way we can support farmers with zoning and planning situations within their community. So Durham is a good example of a community where we supported the development of an agricultural committee at the town level to provide input around ordinances or zoning or town policies that were coming up that could potentially affect farmers in a positive or negative way. On the land protection side, we find that farms provide for communities this cultural and spiritual and traditional space that is super meaningful. So when we are fundraising for land protection projects in specific communities, we can usually capture the intrigue of a community, but what we're always trying to do is remind people that it's not just the farm in your backyard that we need to be paying attention to, it's the entire ecosystem of the agricultural community in the state that we need to be paying attention to. So we're really successful on that local level when we're working on a project in someone's backyard, but we're always working on trying to translate that into a larger story statewide. And then viability, like I mentioned with policy work, we're providing this one-on-one technical assistance to farmers. Farmers, in my estimation, are the original social entrepreneurs, right? It's like, my husband would always tell our children, our farm is like an elevated lemonade stand. I'm like, dude, you should do the books because it's a little bit more complex. We'll just go with that for today. But anyway, helping farmers think of themselves as business people and making sure that they have the skills they need to not only produce the crop. We look to MAFCA and cooperative extension to help with production strategies, but we like to support them on the business side. So how do you make sure that you understand how to do your accounting, how to do your bookkeeping, how to think about what an enterprise budget looks like so that when it's time to make a big investment for an efficiency to make yourself more profitable, that you know what you're thinking about so that your return on the investment makes sense and you can decide whether or not it's worth taking out that loan. So those are the sorts of things that are working well for us at this point for the organization. There's always a highlight each, I feel like each week or each month there's something that we can point to that's exciting, but it is an uphill battle right now. We on Tuesday got notice that we lost $2.5 million grant for a pilot project that we were very excited about to increase land access for marginalized communities. And so when we it's just pressing. Yeah, so I want to be as positive as I can, but it's an uphill battle.
Thank you. Yeah. Garrett.
Bring us home, Garrett. Bring us home.
What's up? Well, I do want to actually end on look, you can't do the work that we do without being fundamentally optimistic.
Yeah.
And the beauty of Maine is that we have the ability to see, to touch, to feel the work that we do, and to know when we do it well. And in addition to that, we have a citizen legislature where we have tremendous access to people in power. And they're connected to their communities in a way that it breaks down a lot of the sort of hubbub we're exposed to from a national landscape. So change is possible, and positive change is possible. And I think we've demonstrated that in a number of different ways in the state. And so the Maine Center for Economic Policy, we're sort of a backbone organization to the legislature in some respects. You know, we do research and analysis on economic issues. We evaluate the impacts of policies, and we, you know, help advance policies. But ultimately, the success of our work is when it resonates with where people are and what their concerns are. So think about this for a second. 1 in 3 workers in the state have gotten an increase in wages in the last 10 years. Why? Because Mainers went to the polls and voted to pass minimum wage laws, right? We have over 100,000 people who now have health coverage that didn't have it before. Why? Because Maine people went to the polls and said, we want to expand Medicaid and make sure more of our neighbors and our friends have access to health care. So those are clear examples in which we as a state, and for those of you who were here in the 1998 ice storm, that's the best of who we are, right? It's neighbor helping neighbor, it's being connected to the issues, it's understanding the impacts on people's lives, and appreciating that we can actually enact solutions not only at the individual level, but at the local level and at the state level that get us to better outcomes. And so our job is really to be at the state level. That minimum wage law, I wrote it. The funniest thing is my side hustle is I coach my local high school cross country and track team. So every year when my kids go out to get their summer jobs, I'm like, how's that wage working for you? Thank your coach. But you know, so at MECEP, Maine Center for Economic Policy, I think we really are focused in 3 different directions. One is thinking about how do we boost wages for workers. And it's not just across the board. You know, we have a care economy in the state where care workers are woefully underpaid. And so we've been pushing, helping to lead the charge to sort of advocate for higher wages for them. Why? Not only is it good for the workers, but it's good for our communities and for our older residents. You know, we have a hospital system that is failing in part because they can't discharge patients to facilities where they can get the support they need. And so hospitals are actually absorbing the cost of a failed care economy, right? I mean, that's just one of many ways. So we're looking to boost wages. We helped pass the farm worker minimum wage last year. For 3 years it took us to get to a place where we extended minimum wage to farm workers. We also are boosting incomes through the tax code, because it turns out that rich people have known for over 100 years that that's the best way to boost their incomes. And in fact, the $4.5 trillion in tax cuts that came from the big ugly bill, the bulk of those go to the top of the income ladder.
Yes.
So in Maine, under the hood for the last 10 years, even under Paul LePage, we made changes to the tax codes, like making our earned income tax credit refundable, as Justin alluded to, like expanding the earned income tax credit and the child tax credit, like introducing and getting in place the sales tax fairness credit, so that what that means is that families at the end of the day, by filing their income taxes, are seeing a material increase in their income. And we have data now that shows that those changes alone have helped to lift 4,000 kids out of poverty in the state, simply by filing their taxes, right? So that's one area of endeavor for us. We're like the nerds with the 4 colored pens in the room, right? The other place is supporting workers and helping to ensure that the rules of the game aren't rigged out of their favor. So today, anybody know what today is in the world of economics? Equal pay day. Equal pay day. So this is the day at which women are finally caught up to men. You would have to work a year and then these 3 months to get to the same level of income that men have. Well, one solution to remedy that is offering up pay transparency and providing greater opportunity for people to understand at different levels of work, what are people being paid? Because it turns out that when you introduce measures like that, women are perfectly good enough at bargaining for themselves and advocating for themselves, but if you put a black box around that information, it's pretty hard to know where you start your bargaining process, right? So making sure that the rules of the game aren't rigged. And then the last thing, and this may be the most contentious thing, but I'm gonna lean into it, Justin.
You're in a roll,
Right. So the biggest thing that we do, quite honestly, and this was our founding, why we were founded. 30 years ago, we were founded by organizations like food pantries, like social service providers, who said, you know what, increasingly the pie that we rely on to fund the work that we do is getting smaller, it's shrinking, right? And you can tally up all the philanthropy in this state you want, and it's enough to keep our Department of Health and Human Services open for 6 days, right? So it is in government where we're gonna solve these problems, and we've got a federal government right now that's making the problem worse. And so we have to be willing to step up at the state level, and what that means is we have to be willing to raise the revenue we need to make sure that we're funding the programs that position people for success now and in the future. And so that's part of what we're doing as well. So the top 1% in the state, the big ugly bill, gives them roughly a $36,000 tax cut on average. We'd like to see at least $24,000 of that come back to the state so that we can continue to fund these programs that people are relying on. We're not asking for all of it.
Why not?
I'm gonna stop you there because I want to make sure that we have an opportunity for time for questions. But you make tax policy interesting, so yeah, you're really good at your job.
Not sexy, just interesting.
Well, and Garrett, you'll be pleased to know that I was accosted in the most kind way by some of your advocates this morning in the State House, advocating all these policies. So you're doing a great job.
Questions, thoughts, comments you have? I think I saw you first.
So speaking about midterm elections and the governor being elected soon, we're kind of like hinting that a lot of this comes back to policy. Are there any candidates that you've seen either through their history or for their proposed policies that you think may be a good choice to help keep our state moving in the right direction?
On Mike?
Here's what I'd say. I would be surprised if any one of us would recommend a specific candidate, but what you want to do is you want to be asking all of the candidates these questions, and you want to narrow in to make sure that as many of them as possible have our issues on their platform.
Well said. That was diplomatic. That was great.
The quick thing I would just add to that, yeah, we're all in 501c3s, so we can't endorse specific candidates. But I appreciate candidates that understand the complexity of this. It's very easy to have a top line, I'm gonna do X. Drill down on that. And if they're trying to tell you it's an easy answer, that should be a flag. These are hard problems to solve. We've given you a lot of ideas on ways that we can do it if we have the will. That's what gets me excited, people who understand it's complex and want to go attack it anyway.
Right.
But it's always good to ask them if they think we should tax millionaires.
I saw a hand of woman, yes.
I'm surprised this wasn't brought up when talking about challenges that farmers are facing. I'm wondering if there have been significant issues because of the increase in ice activity in Maine with migrant labor. I know there's a lot of farmers. I live in Bodenham, and I know that farmers in Bodenham rely on, a lot of them rely on the migrant labor. And it's also for any of the human services. I advocate, I have been very politically active for decades in disability rights. And in the caregiving community, having a tax on migrant workers has been a real problem. And I'm wondering if any of you could speak to that.
Thanks for the question. What I will say is what's interesting about the timing of ice activity is that it doesn't necessarily correlate with the season, the height of the season for most Maine farms, with the exception of dairy and some of the indoor agricultural production. So the large tomato operation up in Madison has had 2 raids of employees on their way to work, and there have been dairies that have also had raids. We are watching closely and interested to see what happens, but you know, as an organization, we're always waiting. We condemn the activities. We want to hear from the farmers about how it's affecting them, and we haven't yet heard from the tomato folks, and we haven't heard so much from dairies yet, but we're curious to see what happens when the produce operations hit their season and folks start coming back to work, because a lot of them aren't here right now. And so we're waiting to see what that looks like, and so we're on guard and
Yeah. Quick response, because I want to make sure we get as many questions answered as possible.
Yeah, I just wanna, there's no question that the ice activity is gonna affect our food systems and the cost of food in this country, and so we will likely see those delayed work. MESEP did an analysis of what the 10-day surge in Maine has meant for our economy, and our calculations were that there's a short-term cost of about anywhere from $15 to $22 million of the 10-day surge in activity. But there's a longer-term annual cost of about $12 million, which has to do with removing those workers from the economy, because of the 207 people that they took out of our state, the bulk of them were actually people who were working. And so when you lose that economic activity, it has broader consequences. So.
And this has definitely impacted the restaurant sector as well. Yes?
What's happening in the legislature this year in regard to this issue?
With regard to this?
The issue of food security and insecurity.
Food security and insecurity. Great question. There have been a number of measures to try to increase. You guys actually might be better off answering this question. Maybe I'll pass it to you. But there are a number of measures that look at trying to figure out how to backfill some of the federal losses. Maine's economy from we have a $11 billion state economy, state budget. We will not be able to backfill the federal losses on the state level. So the measures that are being proposed, some of which will get funded modestly and move through, but it's going to be a challenge.
One that I would flag is the Speaker Fecto has a bill to try to address the SNAP error rate issue. One way or another, Maine's going to be on the hook for a huge portion of SNAP benefits, but we are currently just above this 10% threshold. If we can get below that 10% threshold, which is unlikely to happen quickly, to be clear, but we can put efforts in place to bring it down primarily by investing in health and human services to have the resources they need. If we get below 10%, we shifted $18 million a year back to the federal government. We get it below 8%, that's another $18 million we shift back. So there's a really high opportunity for return on investment here. If we make, put a handful of millions of dollars, it's not cheap, but invest in smart ways to get better or accurate information on the SNAP rules so that then we can make the federal government pay their fair share.
Interesting. Yes?
Yeah, my parents started what's now called the Wolf Neck Center. And when I was 13, I was driving a 6-wheel truck, double clutching it. But it isn't. One of the things I recently realized was that what I lost from that experience, spending the rest of my life as a journalist in Washington, was that you couldn't talk your way out of a bad situation when farming. You had to do something. And I think part of the thing that we don't talk about enough is America being split into workers and talkers. And I think we've got to take that more seriously.
Thank you for that. Yes.
So within Cooperative Extension, we have people involved in all different areas of the food system. One being home horticulture, and that team really focuses on gleaning and working with some of our food security partners, and there's a ton of partners that they collaborate with. But through that work, I've been connecting some farms that I work with those gleaning teams. And one farm that I work with in particular, they're in this total food desert in the corner of Oxford, Cumberland, and York County, and there's just like no resources. So the farmers have really picked that up. One in particular has 5 different ways that they're approaching food insecurity. They're just letting gleaners come in and go across their general fields when there's excess. I know there's a lot of people in this zone doing that. They're taking harvested food and maybe they didn't have enough market for it, so they're donating that at the end of the market day. They're planting rows specifically for donation. They're working with some of the local health centers to offer like prescriptions, like here's a CSA prescription that the medical providers are offering. And they had been working with Good Shepherd Food Bank and the Harvest for Hunger program. So my big roundabout question is there an update on the status of Harvest for Hunger and just some background? That is essentially a wholesale market where farmers can have that contract up front to grow food, receive like a payment for that, and then it goes into the food donation.
Those funds went away, didn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, those funds
That
were
was
gone.
federally funded and has been, that was still 1.3 million, it's not existent right now.
Yeah.
I want to take the pulse. I want to take your question, and I also want to take the pulse. We are wrapping this up in 4 minutes, just to honor those who want to leave, to allow you to escape without sneaking out. But we can pivot after this question and go to, what are ways that you can get involved, or we can keep taking questions. Any preference one way or the other?
How can we get involved?
Okay, so let's take your last question.
Okay. So I was thinking in general terms about food dependency in Maine on corporate foods, primarily across the state borders. Is there an estimate on what proportion of the total food grown in Maine is actually consumed by Maine people? Is there any?
Yeah, there was a survey done, and actually they're doing the study right now for, again, I want to say it's a shockingly low percentage. I want to say it's single digits. Harriet, what's the number?
Yeah, the amount of food that Mainers eat, that comes from Maine is 3.4%.
3.4%.
And we export, for a lot of the fish that get landed in Maine, we export about 90% of that.
Oh.
We haven't talked much about fish, but that's another piece of this.
That's a whole conversation in and of itself, but I am going to respect what you've asked and pivot to ways in which people can get involved. So I think the way, let's just see, one idea for how community members can access needed support themselves or participate in supporting their community members.
Sure. Use your voice. Advocate. If you're interested, fullplace.org is our website. We have advocacy priorities. Any of our organizations, you can learn more about it, but get involved. As Garrett said, we have a citizen legislature. They're accessible. They actually do listen. Not all of them, but that's true. Are actually pretty accountable. So while federal change is really hard, state change is actually possible.
Thank you.
I would just say whatever cause is critical to you, whether it ends up being food insecurity or farmland conservation or climate change or housing insecurity, whatever it is, pick a cause that you care about, find an organization in your community that is doing good work there, and go to their website and see what you can do to help. Chances are they have a space where you can lend financial support, you can volunteer, you can support policies that they're advocating for, you can share about their work in the community, and otherwise, if you are seeking food assistance and you live anywhere in this area, mchpp.org, Find Food is right on the front page.
Thank you. Garrett?
+1 to everything that's been said, but I'm gonna go out and say also help people connect the dots and talk to people who you don't agree with politically. We have found a lot of common cause with people with whom we may not necessarily align on some issues, but who understand and appreciate the impacts of these policies in their communities among people that they feel connected to. If you're interested in Maine Stone for Economic Policy, I did bring some sheets at the back. I also have the legislator fact sheet for this district, and so feel free to look at that. And then if you want to become a rabble rouser to harass people in the legislature, Mainers for Tax Fairness is a coalition that we stand up that's advocating for tax fairness in the state. So we're certainly always looking for organizational partners, individuals who want to want to raise that issue. And again, through the gubernatorial cycle, please feel free to ask any and all gubernatorial candidates if they're willing to raise taxes on millionaires.
Oh, do you want to take a question or?
No.
Okay. The single most important thing you can do for farmers in the state of Maine is fill your grocery cart with Maine products and buy them regularly, every week, every time you go to the store. It's really what makes a difference for farmers in the state of Maine is that they have a market for their product. And secondly, join all of our organizations so that you can keep up to date with what we're doing. And then when you're giving a gift, give a membership to one of our organizations of someone that you want to share the message of what we're up to so that they also get our communications regularly and can keep up to date with what we're doing. And then I can't stress enough, we have term limits in Maine, so run for something, because it's time to pass the baton on to the next person for each legislator. So don't hesitate to show up and put your name in the hat at the municipal level or the state level to get involved.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you. The library is staying open until 8 o'clock. There are refreshments in the back.